Hello and welcome to another episode of Electric Moments, and this time we're going to be talking about everything you need to know about charging an electric car, but we're afraid to ask. Now, it's the one thing that comes up more than any other. If I buy an electric car, where and how am I going to charge it? And naturally, sometimes people feel a bit embarrassed to ask about that. And I confess, when I first started driving an electric car, I didn't know what to do. I hadn't got a clue. But seriously, if I can figure it out, Maddie, anyone can.
You always say that. So in our experience, sometimes it's less of a case of range anxiety and more a case of change anxiety, just everything feeling a little bit different. But it is a lot easier than you might expect. And there are lots of people who are always happy to help at charge points, on the phone or online.
Now, obviously, charging your electric car is going to be as important as filling up at a petrol station for conventional cars. But your options of where you can charge it, where you can fuel up, are hugely increased.
Something I find really interesting is that 71% of cars in England are parked on a driveway or are garaged overnight. So owners can wake up fully charged every single day. And for those who don't, there are lots of locations where you can top up. You can think of these like a new breed of petrol stations at work, at the shops, other venues, and even on motorways too.
And with lots and lots of new electric vehicles with 200 or 300 mile ranges, yeah. There's now a lot of people who are using their cars for high mileage work, and they are, some of them are managing to do that without driveway, so it is possible.
So let's look at all of this in a little bit more detail, starting with home charging. How does home charging work in practice?
Well, when you decide you're going to get an electric car, and if you have a driveway, it makes sense to get a specific electric car charger installed. It doesn't have to be inside, it can be outside on an exterior wall. It's possible, as you and I have both done, to charge a car using a 3-pin plug, like you plug your kettle into. It just takes a little bit longer. So, it's far more convenient and much faster to get the right equipment.
So if this option is available to you, is this something that is expensive? Is it complicated?
It's fairly straightforward to wire it, and it needs a professional electrician to do it. But and in the UK, there is a grant available to drivers to have that unit installed. And interestingly, lease plan, customers can even get a home charger installed as part of the car lease, so you're paying for it within the car lease, right, which spreads the cost of it.
Which is really good. I know from personal experience that charging from home is a real luxury, but what surprised me is that while electric car drivers could charge every night if they wanted to, on average, most will only do so maybe twice a week. And I know that I definitely fit into that category.
Absolutely, yeah. And if you charge it after midnight, and there's timers on the car, so you can plug the car in, it doesn't charge till midnight, then electricity at that time is typically a lot cheaper and it's typically a lot cleaner, which is really good. And there are lots of really interesting renewable tariffs, so you can be assured you're charging off the cleanest and cheapest energy available.
Which is brilliant. But if you aren't lucky enough to have a driveway or a garage, what are the options?
Well, this is getting easier every day, because there's no question it is harder if you can't park a car off the street. But according to ZapMap, 4,000 public chargers were installed last year alone in 2020. It's amazing.
On top of all of the others?
On top of the ones that are already there. And that's an average of one every couple of hours. So there's really a lot of them going in. There's also thousands of on-street charge points being rolled out. So there are some that, in residential areas. So there's some that will pop up out of the curb, so they're flat when they're not in use. They're not cluttering the streets, but they can come up. We filmed some of those fully charged, and then the ones that are in lampposts. So an existing piece of street furniture has now got a socket in it, and you can charge your car off that. And I've used those. They are much easier to use than I expected. So there are alternatives for drivers without their own parking space.
Mm-hmm. Away from home, I can just see that more chargers are appearing at shops, pubs, leisure centres, car parks. But what about petrol stations, the place we are all already familiar with going to fuel up a vehicle?
Well, that's I think a good thing, because most major retailers are adding rapid chargers to their existing sites, and that's becoming more and more common. And it is a thing when you're driving around in an area you don't know and you see a garage. We all know, I can get fuel there, and if you can get electricity there as well, and you don't know anywhere else to go. It's easy to find. They're well lit. There's staff on duty there that can help if you need it. Those things. So there's more of those appearing. And I think the big change that's coming now, and there's many of them being built all around the country, is big charging hubs. So effectively exactly the same as a big petrol station, except it's only electric, it's undercover, there's lots of chargers, and there's staff on site.
Which is really, really reassuring. But also having lots of these sort of, smaller local options is encouraging too. But what if I wanted to go on a longer journey using a motorway?
Well, yeah, that used to be traditionally for electric car drivers. That was the challenge. That was when we were heading out west. The early adopters. So all service stations now on motorways have chargers, but we know from quite painful experience haven't been 100% reliable. But the units, they're not particularly. They're quite dated technology. But the big important thing is they are all being replaced at the moment. And I've been to a couple of the big service stations that have got the new ones in, and they are amazing and so much more reliable, so much easier to use. And then, it's hard not to compare that with the Tesla network of superchargers, which is amazingly, all over the world, effectively. If you look at it, an incredible number of chargers, and they're really reliable. So you just plug the car and it charges, and
seamless.
And you pay for it through the car, which is kind of what we all hope we'll get to. So there are some excellent private operators now that have risen to this challenge. New chargers are springing up close to major routes, and the electric highway, which is the original chargers on motorways, are being brought up to date, as I said. So that is really, really good. In the next 12 months, we're going to see literally thousands of new chargers being installed.
So really, just like Robert said, it wasn't flawless, it isn't flawless, but it's really great to hear that it is being fixed. So now we're going to talk to an electric driver and get their take on the charging experience.
So I've had an electric car for 8 years now, so I suppose you might call me a bit of an early adopter. I started with a Nissan Leaf 24 kilowatt hour, which had a relatively small range of about 80 miles. And I've, since I'm actually onto my third electric car now, all three have in fact been Nissan Leafs. Okay, what I can tell you about charging from home. So people often hear online, they say, but if I go to the petrol station, I plug in my pump, I'm away in 5 and 10 minutes, fully loaded with fuel. Okay, but look at it this way. I get home and I plug in my charger. That takes me 5 seconds and in, okay? I get up in the morning, I take it out. It's like charging my iPhone. I've spent maybe 10 seconds, and I'm leaving each day with the equivalent of a full tank of electrons. So it is not a slow problem charging at home. It's easy, okay? And okay, not everyone is going to have the option of charging at home. If you're living in a block of flats, or if your landlord won't let you put one in the car park, okay, that is going to be slightly more difficult than if you have a home charger. But I know lots of people that manage just fine. Remember, nobody at home has got a petrol pump, okay? So people manage without having fueling at home. Now, I've also got another advantage with my home charging situation, which is not typical. I've got something called vehicle to grid, and I think that's something you're going to hear more and more about. Now, vehicle to grid means, as it sounds, I can plug the car into my house. And it not only can charge the car, but it can also, the car can charge the house. Now, at the moment, the only cars that can do this are the Nissan Leafs, and that's probably one of my reasons I chose this particular car. I was lucky enough to be able to do this as part of an early trial from one of the electricity companies who provided me this system. And it means I plug in my car when I get home, so that's in the middle of peak, when everyone's plugging in their electric appliances, their kettle, they're putting on their electric oven. And my car notices that there's demand and actually powers the house. And then when everyone's settled in bed, okay, and when the grid has got more than enough electricity from all those wind turbines going around, okay, that is when the car then automatically starts drawing that power back. So what it means is, by using a vehicle to grid system, I can use this car to even out the peaks in the grid. So people always say that electric cars are going to be hard on the grid, actually this is one way in which they can actually be helping the grid. So to think about charging away from home, what I would say is there are lots of options, and I think the way you approach charging away from home is different from the mentality of a petrol driver. So if you're a petrol driver, you're going to go fill your car up full, you're going to drive it down to the very end, and then you're going to go to a petrol station and fill up. And that's the normal way we've always been programmed to do it. Once you get an electric car, your mentality changes to some degree. There are lots of chargers around all over the place. You'll see 7 kilowatt chargers, which will charge a car like this in maybe 4 or 5 hours. You'll see them up for free in supermarkets, at cinemas, at the sides of roads, and a lot of them are free. What you end up developing is a mentality of what we call grazing. Now, grazing charging means you're not looking to fill up your car to full, but what you are looking to do is to make most of those opportunities when your car is sitting there doing nothing. And let's face it, most of the time, 90% of the time, our cars are just sitting there like this, doing nothing. Well, why not make use of that? So if you go and do a shopping trip and you're walking around the shops for an hour, if you plug into a public 7 kilowatt charger, you get back, you maybe put a third back on your tank. The other type of charging away from the home is what we call rapid chargers. And those are much faster. So by comparison, if a 7 kilowatt charger might be at your supermarket, a rapid charger is 50 up to 150, and even some new ones which are a blistering 350 kilowatts. So a rapid charger like that could charge a car like this from say 10% up to about 80% in something like 30 or 40 minutes. So can the different types of charging cables be confusing? Well, I think it's useful to talk about what cables you will deal with as a new EV driver. The two basic cables which you'll keep in your boot are a cable that allows you to plug into a 3-pin plug. These are affectionately known as granny cables in the EV community because it's where you go when you want to plug in at your granny's. Those would run about 3 kilowatts and those usually be kept in your boot. And then you'll have something called a Type 2 cable. And those are ones which will plug to 7 kilowatt chargers. So these are the sort of small posts that you might see in your local Tesco's or in the library or whatever. Then you've got the rapid chargers, the one you're going to use on your long trip. Now you don't need a cable in the car for those. Those will come with tethered cables. So you're going to reach off the charger and plug that into your car. I would say it's a good time to become an EV driver now. When I started as an EV driver, it was probably a little bit more challenging, shall we say. There are a lot more rapid chargers up and down the country now, and they're getting a lot better and a lot easier to use. When I first started driving an electric car, as I say, I had a car with a lower range, and I really had to think, where was that next rapid charger? And sometimes the gaps along the major highways, some of them were a bit too big. There were a lot more bare areas when you were traveling around the country. To be honest, it's a lot easier now. In fact, I would say the challenge has gone out of it.
That really resonates with me. If you have an iPhone, you're not going to spend your time worrying about how you use a Galaxy or vice versa. And actually, you know, the whole plugging in process is pretty easy. You can think of a Type 2 a little bit like a USB port. You bring your own cable and you can just plug all sorts of stuff into it.
But I can also testify that electric car drivers are really friendly. When I've gone up to charging, well, I'd like to say that when I go to a charging station, I see someone else struggling, I will always go and help them and say it's not that hard. But actually, you learn very, very quickly when you do that. And you know, if you do get into difficulty, there's normally someone around that can help, or you can call. There's a number on the charger, and you can ring them up and say, I don't know how to plug my car in.
Yeah, there's always a number.
Yeah.
So in short, it's probably not as complicated as you might be anticipating. And with more and more investment going into the charging networks, it is absolutely getting easier and easier too.
I mean, it is a far cry from when I first started driving an electric car
I can't imagine.
a decade ago. Well, there was only one rapid charger in the whole country, and that was behind a locked gate. So it was much harder to access. So for more helpful information about this, please join us again in the next episode.
If you have been,
thank you for watching.